the show, Pilar Alessandra. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
We have been going back and forth for months because you are a busy lady and I'm a busy guy. So it's amazing that we've been able to do this.
I know. Thank you for your patience.
Oh no, thank you for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Like I was saying before we started recording, I reached out to you back when I was a young screenwriter, looking for some advice in 2010 on my first, I think it was my first screenplay, and we went back and forth a little bit, but nothing materialized about it. But I've known about you for a long, long time, and you do some really great work out there for screenwriters. So thank you for all the work that you do.
Thank you.
And
I love it. It's great work.
And you are one of the original podcasts out there.
I sound so old. All this is making me feel real old.
I didn't want to say OG, but since you throw it out there, you're one of the OGs of the podcasting screenwriting world, up there with John August. And because you've been, 10 years you were doing your On the Page podcast?
Yeah, I didn't even realize. I mean, at the time, I was too lazy to blog. And so I was like, I'll do this. And I guess there just weren't that many screenwriting podcasts at the time. Mm-hmm. And so it caught on. And when I realized that people were actually listening, I was like, ooh, I have a responsibility here. I better start making it good. I better start making it about something. And since then, I take the responsibility pretty seriously. Even the show can be bumpy and silly, but the whole point of it every week is that somebody should leave with a nugget of information about the craft or business of screenwriting. So that's what we do.
I know the feeling. When I first started out too, I just and then when people started listening, you start taking it serious. Like, oh crap, someone's listening to this. We gotta.
What's happening? Yes.
We gotta bring our A game.
Right.
So let's start at the very beginning. How did you get into this business?
I was just in my 20s, and I sort of accidentally fell into a script reading job because I liked writing analytical papers in college about books. And somebody remembered that. They're like, wow, in the lit classes, you wrote these really great papers. That's kind of what we need. We need this book report called a coverage at our studio or our production company. Would you do it like once a week? And then when I found out I could actually make money at it, because I had no idea, right. I had samples, and I was able to get a job through Amblin Entertainment that way as a script reader and learn on the job as a reader, and then ended up sort of teaching people how to be a script reader as well. They were getting jobs. And then I found I really loved teaching, and I wanted to find tools that actually could fix certain things that I was seeing, sort of common mistakes, if you will, in scripts, and I hated just saying pass or consider. And I thought, well, could I develop some tools? Would they work? And they did work. And so that's how the classes were born.
Very cool. And you also worked at DreamWorks for a little bit.
Right. So when Amblin became DreamWorks, so to speak, it was kind of, for a while, it was all the yes. Then
it was a hodgepodge of stuff.
Right. I'd been at Amblin for a while, and so I became sort of in a senior story analyst position, so that I was also doing notes on existing projects. I also worked for a number of other companies as well, always analyzing material, doing notes on material. But I found working directly with writers is more satisfying because I could say, and here's a possibility of fixing it, rather than always saying, pass or consider. That's no fun.
And when you were working at DreamWorks, you were working at a time that was pretty cool. It was early 2000s, so they were at the height of their powers, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, it was actually, again, because let's just go with aging me with every question. It was actually more in the 90s. Okay.
I'm trying to help. Help.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. But it was, like sort of it was the age of the rock star writer.
Yeah,
where
Shane Black, Joe Esterhaus, those guys.
Yeah, and the idea that you would get a script at even as late as 9 p.m., have to make sure that coverage was in by 7 a.m. because there'd be a bidding war at 8 a.m. I mean, people were throwing so much money in to get the next big shiny thing, which also is why they burnt out a little bit, and started sort of holding back and saying, okay, we're not taking any more specs. And when the writer strike happened, when they had sort of an excuse to stop taking original material for quite a while. But yes, at the time, lots of scripts, lots of excitement, and lots of learning for me.
It must have been a wonderful time. I always tell people about that time, which I wasn't around, but I did study that. I mean, I was around, of course.
You weren't born, right?
No, yeah, I'm 22. I'm 22. Right. Yes, I'm just worn really hard. But I wasn't in the business at that time. I was in college and those type of areas. But you would read these stories of like every week, Joe Esterhaus, $2 or $3 million, Shane Black, and all these rock star screenwriters. Yeah. And I feel sometimes when I speak to screenwriters, they think that that's still going on. And to a certain extent, there are $1 million buys still, and there are some spec stuff that happens every once in a while, but it's nothing like it was like every week, every day there was some new stuff coming out, and these guys were making just. I mean, Esterhaus, I think Esterhaus pulled like $25 million, and most of them were never produced. That was the thing.
Right. You could actually make, sort of a sweet living and never have been produced. There were a lot of people who got development deals and got, their scripts bought. But also, along those lines, they would take things on pitch a lot, and then they'd have to hire another writer because the draft that they got was only So half of my job at that time was reading writing samples to rewrite other things that they had bought on pitch or too quickly. So now they're sort of doubling what they have to pay, even in the development process. But again, for me to sort of distinguish between like, okay, what is a project that really, really works, in terms of idea, and another project that works in terms of execution, so you can have a great writing sample as well. And that all helps in the work that I do now.
So what is the biggest mistake you see in first-time screenplays?
Oh, I don't think there is one biggest mistake. I mean, it used to be overwriting. I could have sort of an easy answer to that question. But now, gosh, there's so many resources out there. Writers are so savvy. They're so well-read, and they understand, sort of how to be spare on the page. Mm-hmm. So that's not really it. I think it's maybe sometimes not doubling down on their own good idea, that they'll start something with a high concept and then they'll think it's boring. So then they start to sort of snowball into another high concept, or they'll bring in this magical character here, and then suddenly we're in a dream and backstory. And they just kind of think that by throwing in all these things, it gets more interesting, when actually it's getting more convoluted and you're not serving your own good idea. So I'd really like people when they just lean in to their own wonderful log line, and that's the best rewrite they can do.
So in your opinion, what is a screenplay that you've read that is just like, oh man, they got this? Like if everybody should read the screenplay and use this as a template of what to do and how they did it. Of course, not copy the screenplay, but just like, man, that's just good writing. I first of all, you're probably not going to believe me, but I'm always the most in love with whatever client's work I read that just worked. You know what I mean? I'm always like, that script. So I don't really have one script that I tell everybody to read, but I do say that, in the age where you can just type in the script title and then script PDF, and something will magically, illegally download for you, you can go to like your favorite movies and then go to the section of the script where that favorite moment was in that favorite movie and look at how it was executed. Like, how did they make you feel that way? Whether it was feeling romantic or surprised or horrified. And to me, that's the best thing you can do with scripts, is find those moments in those great scripts with movies you love. So I'm kind of throwing it back, not going like there's this one script, because I think every script has its moment. Yeah. Every script's work, oh, I love this part of it, but it also, there are dud moments in every great script. Absolutely.
You don't want to copy everything that your favorite writer does. every writer does is not perfect.
It's like in a John Ford film, the Indians take the fort, like that. You know, that's one line, but it took 20 minutes on screen.
Right.
Now, what is your approach to structure? Do you suggest creating a beat sheet of some sort, or how do you do structure?
Well, in my classes, I do have everybody create a beat sheet, but not to beats that I think they should have. So I'm not sitting there going, on page 12, there needs to be this, and on page 20, there needs to be that. Instead, I first ask them to think big picture in terms of beginning, middle, and end. And we usually take that middle and divide it into 2 parts. So we've got beginning, middle part 1, middle part 2, and end. So you sort of have 4 equal parts that you can play with. And then I ask them to divide those up a little bit into beats of story. And I just ask them to think of every beat in terms of what somebody wants to do, what they actually do, and what gets in the way. And if you have those beats of story with the, sort of fitting into those 4 equal parts, great, look, you got a structure. What story you want to tell or how you want to tell it is completely up to you. But it helps people at least organize so that they can see the big picture, have some kind of map to follow, and then start writing. Now,
character building is always a very difficult situation. How do you build an interesting character in your opinion? What's some advice that you can give for screenwriters to build interesting characters? Because I've read a lot of screenplays and I've watched a lot of movies, and the characters are just like, there's no depth, especially in the big studio movies too. I always beat up on the DC universe, but there's a reason why Marvel's done very well and DC has not, because the characters, you really feel Iron Man, you really feel Spider-Man, and you don't feel as much for the other side of the fence sometimes.
Well, I think if you look at the Marvel characters, they're always paying off their own particular character rules. So things that they always or never do, Tony Stark's philosophy of the world, his flaw in the fact that he is always going to sort of try and grab the attention of the room, right? He's always going to try and alpha lead, right? What his soft spot is, and they're constantly mining these things we already know about them and bringing them through the scenes. So he doesn't stop and talk about his past. Instead, his past is always shining through in the choices that he makes. So when going back to my classes, when we're talking about character development, I really love it when we are learning about characters on the job. How they were raised, who they are, comes through in the choices they make and the behaviors that they exhibit. So it's what we see rather than what they stop and talk about. I am not a big one on stopping and discussing things that happen before page 1.
You basically shouldn't have 2 characters go, "Hey Tony, I know that you had a bad childhood and that's why you're an alcoholic now." Like, that's not what you do. But a lot of screenwriters do that, unfortunately.
All the time. I read it all the time. There's always that, stop and talk scene, and it also becomes sort of a battle of backstory. Like, you think you had a bad childhood, it's like, it's just, why are you doing that? But if I saw someone, look at an object and start shaking, okay, I know that there is some kind of traumatic incident connected with that object, or that object triggers something from the past. And I will find out more with the choices that character makes. And if at a certain point they've earned their cathartic moment of revealing the backstory, fine. But at least you've shown it for a while, and now I'm getting just what I need to sort of fill in the blanks.
It's kind of like Indiana Jones, where he's afraid of snakes, and he never says, he does say he's afraid of snakes, but you never know why until the 3rd movie, where he actually explains the backstory of it, which is such a great payoff for that character. And right. even that little cut that Harrison Ford has is when he was a kid and he tried to do the whip for the first time and he's hit himself. Like, those little nuggets are it just adds like a tapestry, if you will, on the characters.
But all we cared about in the first one was, wow, this guy who isn't afraid of anything is afraid of this one thing. We all have fears, and that's all we had to know. And then once that's in, we can also see it pay off, in a pit full of snakes. So it works there, you're right. As you build out these trilogies, then you can find out more and more, and it's what keeps us coming back to the movies.
And that's why the payoff, I mean, with Endgame, as of this recording, Endgame came out a few weeks ago, and it is just a crescendo of 22 films. It's no one's ever done anything like this. And again, I am a Marvel guy, but I'm not like, oh, everything's great. They have bad movies. But this was such a wonderful way of just wrapping it up and payoffs of the characters over 10 years. Yeah. It is amazing. I mean, I'm sure you've been watching these stories as they've, come out over the years, and to see this kind of crescendo of these characters, it's just nothing like it. I've never seen. It
was so great. And you're just sitting there going, that last moment of like, say it, like, and to be honest with you, there were moments in that battle when I thought, oh, that's a great way to end it. And then I feel like they would bring in this other thing like, oh, no, that's the great way to, oh, of course they have to, they finished off everything with still leaving room for whatever they're going to do with the next series of Marvel movies, Spider-Man, etc.
What I find, no worries, it's okay. What I found also fascinating, and I heard this from the directors and the writers, is that they actually, when they got to the battle scene of Endgame, that was going to be a 3-act structure of that, literally of the battle. It was it was like 45 minutes, so it was such a massive part. They were going to do a 3-act structure of the battle itself within a giant because it was just so. I mean, I can't. The screenwriters for that film and the directors, how they were able to work in so many storylines, so many characters, so many, like, giving everybody, because every single one of them literally is the star of their own franchise.
Right,
and yet they're giving everyone their moment. They're giving Miss Marvel the moment. They're giving the Spider-Man that moment. They're giving Iron Man and Thor and Hulk. How do you, like, with people who are writing very, a lot of characters in a screenplay, and I know that there's not many films like Endgame, but out there that have a lot of different characters, that have like let's say a Suicide Squad or a Guardians of the Galaxy, that have a group of characters. Any advice on how to balance that? Because that is an art in itself.
Well, I think, first of all, step back, think big picture in terms of your major act breaks, so that you know at least where this is all landing, okay? And again, when we're talking about act breaks, it doesn't have to be prescribed. This must happen at this point, right? But if you imagine that you have at least 3 turning points in a project, okay? What leads into that second act, and what feels like that midpoint, and what's the end of that second act before you're really going for it in the third act, just knowing those things, okay? That first. Then look at your ensemble of characters, what it's driving toward, but they're all having sort of their mini stories along the way. See if you can now tell each of those stories in 3 to 4 scenes. So again, thinking like, what's that beginning, that middle part 1, middle part 2, and end just for that character. Okay, because sometimes when it's heavily populated, that's all you're going to get. Or even look into your favorite ensemble movies and, pluck out one character and just think about the scenes that you're seeing them in. You're going to see it's really not that many. So how are they telling that one story, and how do they sort of jump in so that you're focusing on that major story beat, even though it's only a scene? So I think that would be my advice. I hope that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. Now, do you have any advice on how to find the voice of a character? Because so many characters are so vanilla, and they just don't have any flavor to them. Like, let's bring back Indiana Jones. Boy, that man has a lot of flavor, and you pick that character, and within the first 5 minutes of the movie, you know who that character is, and then you start developing the voice of that character. And like you were saying with like Tony Stark and these other characters, that there's rules within what they do and their actions that they stay true to. What do you do to find the voice of a character?
Well, I have a couple of tips that I sort of have my writers run through in class. Number 1 is, what profession or stage of life are they in, and therefore what language do they speak? So we all speak English, maybe, right? But some of us speak surfer, and some of us speak comic book geek, and some of us speak lawyer, right? So that profession or stage of life, that becomes a language. So that's one way to find a unique voice. Another is a verbal rule. So this is not what they say, but how they say it. So some people curse, some people give one-word answers, some people ramble, right? So their verbal rules, that's another thing to think about. A third is what region or country are they from? What phrases do they use? So Thor is going to use, phrases from where is he from? What?
Well, he's from a magical land, but generally Norse is kind of like that kind of vibe. Yeah.
And he speaks the language of the gods, right? So he will say things that nobody else would say, right?
And get away with it.
Absolutely, but including those phrases, like that's his normal world, right? And then the fourth one is to actually magically cast in your head. Be okay about having the voice of Harrison Ford in your head. Okay, that will be a completely different voice on the page than, say, Chris Pratt, right?
Right.
So having it, right, will help you express the line. Nobody has to know that that's living in your head. And if you were doing a spec of a TV show, you would have the advantage of characters that we already know that you're channeling. So why not do that with original material? So those are my 4 ways of finding voices.
I really love the stage of life idea. That is I've never heard that idea. It's a really great idea because it really you're there. I'm a 45-year-old comic book geek who lives in the basement of his mom's house. That pretty much gives the voice of that character pretty quickly. Now, is it a voice that we've seen 1,000 times too?
Yeah.
That's another thing. So you could start tossing it around and start adding other things. Oh, and they're also an archaeologist. Oh, okay, well, there you go. So they start adding like little flavors of things but that's a good starting point of how you can kind of brainstorm ideas.
Have you seen Booksmart yet?
I'm dying to. It really looks fantastic.
So good, right? So if you said, well, she speaks high school senior, well, we have these sort of stereotypes in our head, right? Mm-hmm. But if you say she speaks overachiever, okay, that's different. She happens to be a high school senior who speaks overachiever, right? Now she's got an interesting voice, so
that's interesting. That's great.
Everything about that movie I just adored, because every time you thought it was going to make a certain choice based on all these movies you've seen, it makes a slightly different one. Doesn't mean that it has to be the opposite, but it's just different, and it works for the character. It's in keeping with the rules of the character that we've come to know very quickly with the characters. It's lovely.
A good example of that is like you just said, high school is Clueless. Like they're not just your general, they're Valley Girls basically, but Valley Girls in that time period, not like Valley Girl. Like when Valley Girl came out back in, was it like the late 70s or early 80s with Nicolas Cage, that was the first time anyone had ever heard Valley Girl talk. Like, oh, for sure, and all that kind of stuff. And that was, they were all high school kids. Or Fast Times in Ridgemont High. So how many different type of high schools have we seen on screen? So Fast Time in Ridgemont High speaks very differently than Breakfast Club.
Right. If you go even dig deeper to, why did Clueless not feel cookie cutter, right? You could go for, the lead is, she speaks matchmaker in a way, right? that is everything. She looks at everything in terms of who to fix up, who should be with whom.
Who's the project, right?
And it speaks to her control issues. So her voice matches what she needs to do. I have to make a confession, right? So I'm in my 20s reading, and I misread that script as just another Valley Girl script, and I passed on it because I was in my 20s and I thought, these girls are dumb. They're just Valley Girls. And I really wasn't looking at, no, wait a minute, they've got their own rules. They've got their own ways of looking at things. I was actually probably too much of a clueless Valley Girl myself at the time to really have the perspective. It haunts me.
Really?
And it almost fired. Yeah.
It almost got you fired because you passed on the script and it made gazillions amounts of money.
Yeah. The idiot. Yeah, right.
Yeah. But the thing is, too, it was also a lot of perfect storms in that situation with Alicia Silverstone was perfectly cast. And I was who's it? Not Penelope Miller. Who was the director of that?
It was, oh my God, she's amazing.
Not Beth
No,
Miller.
we're so bad.
Oh
We're
my
so
God. No, it's a female director. Okay, I forgot who she is. Someone.
Thanks for making me feel better. I really appreciate it. But
That's right.
no, it was just me being an idiot. So,
Are there any other?
anything else that I passed on?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, it was a long time ago.
Sure.
You know,
But nothing that stood out like that.
but you know what? One thing I have to say, I do think that it does say something about getting older, having some experience, or also having a bigger picture view of the world. That if you're just reading scripts from your own little bubble, right, you're going to miss some really valuable material. You have to sort of think like an audience, for one thing, a really wide audience, and you have to kind of be open to characters and situations that may not necessarily be you or any choices you would make. Which is why I get like prickly when people go into this unlikable note, because it's like, well, that might be unlikable for you,
Right, perspective.
but it could be fascinating for someone else. That doesn't mean we shouldn't sort of look at this life on screen and dig into that story.
It was kind of like Clueless for you. Like you knew those girls because you were probably close. You were too much of a valley girl yourself. So you're like, this is stupid.
Right. I was judging them. Exactly. And it had nothing to do with me,
That's fair. Now, do you have any other advice on developing a good protagonist and what they need to do to kind of move that story forward? By the way, are you more character driven or plot driven, or is it a combination of two? Because I know I've spoken to a lot of people on the show, and some people are like, it's all about character. You need a good plot, you need a good structure, but it's all about character. And other people are like, no, it's about plot, it's about structure, and characters are an addition. Where do you fall on that pendulum?
I'm gonna say something wishy-washy and say it's what the project needs. So in my first day of the first draft class, I have my writers brainstorm in 3 different ways, because they may be coming at their project in 3 different ways, and they have to see what's really going to work for them. So the first thing that we do is brainstorm around character, sort of throwing that character into uncomfortable situations and seeing what choices they make and seeing what structure emerges. The second thing I have them do is actually brainstorm around event. So if they have this one key scene in their head, what happens, where is it on the timeline? Is it in the beginning, the middle, the end? And that way, what comes before it, what springs after it? And the third way I have them brainstorm is just, okay, if it's just your big high concept idea, let's make it the most killer log line possible and see if that really helps you brainstorm. So I really go with what's going to serve the writer's intentions the most. I don't think there's one way to do it.
Yeah, because there's certain movies like, I was just thinking of Wayne's World. Like, that's a character-based kind of film. The structure is, and the plot's, it's fine.
Right.
But you're just going on the road with these guys who are crazy. Cheech and Chong. Let's put that out there. It's like...
Those both came out of sketches, right? So we have these guys who we just laughed at the dynamic between them, this one little world that they were in, and then did a lot of what-ifing to find a story. So right. What if, I think Wayne and Garth, are they trying to get to their ultimate concert?
I don't even remember. I don't even remember what the plot is. I remember Bohemian Rhapsody. I remember Bohemian Rhapsody, and that he had a crush on a girl, and then basically all the skit stuff. That's basically what I remember from the movie.
Exactly. As long as they have like one goal and they're making choices along the way that are specific to them, great. You got to film.
It's like a Muppet movie. I mean, it's like you're hanging out with the Muppets, and then they're all doing this one thing. We got to get to the show. We got to break in and steal that diamond. We got to that kind of thing. It's fascinating. Now,
but there tends to be an emotional turn somewhere in a Muppet movie at some point, right?
They always is.
Miss Piggy is going to break up with Kermit, or Kermit's going to break up with Miss Piggy, or there's a misunderstanding between,
Right.
I don't know. There's always something that sort of reinvests you emotionally. So even though we're saying, yeah, we take these characters, put them in gold, there's always also that sort of emotional moment.
Even with the Wayne and Garth, there was some sort of emotional thing. It doesn't make you
Sure.
cry, but there's something. I just love that this interview went to the Muppets, and now we're using the Muppets as a structural example for characters.
We can learn many things from the Muppets. Yes.
Amen. Amen, sister. Now, antagonist. Creating a good bad guy is so, I mean, there's such a problem. I think it's an epidemic of really bad foreign bad guys in action movies. Like, it's always the guy who has the accent and all this stuff. And then you look at some of the greatest bad guys of all time, and I'll go just at the action genre. Hans from Die Hard, who also was a foreign dude and all that stuff. But he was so wonderfully written, so wonderfully directed and played. And you look at those, like Mr. Joshua from Lethal Weapon, who was so amazing, and of course like Darth Vader and those kind of characters. What some advice do you have for creating a really great antagonist? The Joker, I just came to me, of course, one of the greatest.
With the Joker from The Dark Knight, you're talking about?
Mm-hmm. No, the 1969 Adam West version. No, I'm joking.
You never know, right? So if there is, I wish I could quote it right now, but I actually show the log line of the Joker from The Dark Knight in one of my classes, because his log line is that he's somebody who is trying to bring fun back to the city and stop this horrible masked man from ruining all of that fun. He believes what he is doing is a good thing. If he has to kill people to do it, so be it. So every bad guy has his or her own log line, and my first piece of advice is, what is their log line? What's their movie, right? So as they're looking in on these scenes, how do they feel they're the hero? And I'm certainly not the first person to say that, but it is worth it to actually go in and go, what is your antagonist's log line? They don't think they're evil. They think they're right.
Right. And isn't that this truth for every bad guy in history? Every dictator, every mass murderer, and in one way, shape, or form, they're not there twiddling or twisting their mustache. They truly believe that they're doing something. If not, you couldn't really go to sleep at night. So you truly believe in a psychotic break of some sort, obviously that breaks from societal norms, that you're doing good from your perspective. Because I always tell people, the bad guy is always the hero of his own story. He's not the villain,
Absolutely. Yes. So the writer, it's like, we can say this for days, but if the writer doesn't actually know what that story is, if they just go, I believe you, right, and still write them in this cookie cutter way, they haven't really gone into into the bad guy's psyche. Why are they doing what they do? Now, that does not mean that you stop the script and you go into a flashback of what made the guy evil. That's different. That's their backstory, and we don't need it. We just need to know what is their point of view now, in this moment. Why do they think they're right? And it will humanize them in terms of how they express their lines, some of the choices that they make, things like that.
So two great examples I was just thinking off the top of my head was Thanos, obviously, because it's on mind, is, in his mind, he's just trying to, it's the universe is overpopulated, and there's just too many people, so we're just going to get rid of half of the universe. Yeah. That's his point of view. He's like, I'm just trying to help. And then, right? That's basically Thanos.
I think to the actor's gentle voice that he uses.
Yeah, right.
Right? He doesn't, even though he's huge, he's always kind of explaining this like he's a philosophy professor, right?
Yes, Josh Brolin. Yeah.
Right. And so I think it goes with, again, the point of view is very clear, so the actor is able to now interpret it with more depth than usual.
Yeah, and a lot of the Marvel movies, that's one of the weaknesses of those Marvel movies, is that the antagonist always, a lot of times, wasn't as strong as the protagonist. The protagonist was so well developed, but the antagonists weren't. Thanos is a good one, but the other one in Black Panther, was wonderful because you just felt bad for him. You know, because he was so. You remember Black Panther? Monger. Oh, I forgot his name. Warmonger. But Warmonger, I think his name was. But he's basically he's like a stepbrother or a cousin. He's a cousin to Black Panther, and he never got raised in Wakanda. He was thrown out in the street, and he was rejected.
Right. And we do see a little of his backstory too. That triggers it. Yeah.
Right, and he just wants to come back and take what's his. I mean, because it's obviously wrong what he's doing, but you get it. Like like, if I was put in that position, would I make those choices if I had that situation? You know, and that's what really humanizes that character. Like even the main character felt bad about, spoiler alert, when he doesn't win at the end. You know, if he feels bad when he has to, you know, finish the job, if you will, because he's like, I feel your pain. I do, and that was what made, I think that made that movie such a hit, as well as all the other cool stuff that happened in it. But without that great antagonist, I mean, what is Star Wars without Darth Vader? Like,
right. And look at going to Devil Wears Prada, Miranda.
So
right.
wonderful.
So like, you know, what's fun is how beastly she is through most of it, and then we're starting to see her point of view. And this is a busy working mother. Like this is like. Sorry, you know, sometimes you need to get the stuff done. Plus, she has an expertise in fashion. So when she's cutting your protagonist down to size, she's not just saying you're stupid. She's saying you don't understand the industry you're in, and this is why. You know, and she's right.
Yeah.
So you can't help but go, oh yeah, I wish you hadn't been so mean to the protagonist, but you were right. I get you.
Yeah, and that's what makes that movie so wonderful. I mean, Meryl Streep, of course, but that character was so wonderfully played. Yeah, agreed, 110%. Now, do you have any techniques for brainstorming scenes? You know, sometimes you have a story, but like I always find that the beginning and the end are very easy to write. It's that middle stuff that gets a little rough. How they get to point A to point B. Creating those scenes in a good way, or in a entertaining way, or in a way that we haven't seen 1,000 times. I feel sometimes that screenwriters in the 50s and 60s and 70s had such a leg up because audiences weren't nearly as sophisticated, and a lot of stuff hadn't been done yet. You know, nowadays, how much content are we making? How many things have we seen? I've seen tens of thousands of movies probably in my lifetime, let alone TV show episodes and stuff. So I'm extremely literate. You're extremely literate on, like, my wife is even going, oh, the storyline on that one didn't work. The character arc didn't work. Like, she's even pointing out bad green screen shots now, and she's not in the business. So we're so sophisticated. What do you do about coming up with some original ideas, and what kind of brainstorming techniques do you suggest?
Well, in a way, you know, you can flip what you just said and make it an advantage for the modern day screenwriter, because the audience does have so much context now. Right? That you can drop into a scene at a specific point without setup, because the audience already knows the journey that led there, because we've seen other versions of this story in other movies. So that's the first thing I would say is drop in, okay? Maybe drop in at the least hand-holding part and see what it looks like. Okay. Another is, if you do that, does that work within the context of the movie in terms of something that you set up earlier on? Another is having a fresh take on an old trope. So it's absolutely fine to have tropes that look, with genres.
Well, Scream, like Scream, for example.
Yeah. But I mean, that was very self-aware and sort of calling it out. But like, if you look at, I always use an interrogation scene as an example, because immediately you know what that looks like, right?
Light bulbs flinging. I mean, you got the two guys, good cop, bad cop. Yeah, the room's dark. Yeah, we get it.
But change one thing, change up the setting and go, it's not an interrogation there. It's an interrogation in a park. It's an interrogation in the ocean. It's an interrogation at an amusement park. It's an interrogation in a kitchen. And suddenly there's a fresh take on it. So you can do one little thing, even just changing up setting, and that will give it a fresh take. So again, I'm going to book smart to have everybody, like when you're watching it, look at the fresh take on certain things, certain scenes you thought you knew.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking of now, of course, my juices start flowing interrogation. So I'm like, well, what if one of the cops is like always eating, like constantly while he's talking to somebody, he's just eating and it's disgusting, and you're focusing on what he's eating, but yet he's tearing this guy apart. I don't know. I'm just throwing things out there, but it's just a new way of doing it.
Right. What if the cops is a clown instead?
Dressed as a clown because he was undercover somewhere. We're writing something together. We need a co-writer credit on the scene. Now, tell me a little bit about Coffee Break Screenwriter, which has been around for a couple years.
Oh, you mean?
Oh, that book. Yes, the Coffee Break Screenwriter. I want you to tell me, first of all, how does a writer write a screenplay in 10 minutes at a time?
Well, kind of like if you look at the answers to the questions you've asked me, right? If you actually applied all those things that we just talked about, you could make progress in 10 minutes on a character. For example, let's say you wanted to go back to voice. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to do a pass on 10 pages, making sure that my character is now speaking his or her stage of life or profession. Okay, so I've now rewritten 10 pages just with that one technique. That could take you 10 minutes of time. That could take you your coffee break time. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we spend this much time on like updating Facebook or tweeting something fabulous or whatever, you know, when you could just go like, I'm going to do one thing to rewrite or make progress in the script. And really you can do it. And I know you can do it because I do it in my classes. I make people like, I don't even give them 10 minutes. I give them, you know.
Isn't I always tell people, this is one of the pieces of advice I always give people when they want to write screenplays. I'm like, just set up a goal of 1 page a day, you know, and in 90 days you'll have a screenplay. If you're feeling froggy, do 2 pages a day and you'll be done in 45 days. Do 3 pages a day and you're done in a month, and you've got a first draft of a month. In a month, you know, and I've actually had people come back to me like, oh, Alex, thank God you told me to do that. I'm doing that now. And I'm like, but it sounds so simple, but yet it's not. And it could be a 10-minute, and you're done.
Now, what will kill your 10 minutes is when you go back in and you reread that page first. Because you reread it, you're going to go in and rewrite it, you're going to struggle over it, and then when you're getting your second day, I have to go back to work, you know, or back to my kid, you know, or school. So yeah, try and do these things knowing you will be able to go back in and make it all perfect, but don't try and get it perfect right away.
Well, what are some of your suggestions for the dreaded rewriting process?
The dreaded rewriting process. It goes back to something that we talked about a little bit earlier, which is first, lean into your own good idea. The first pass I have everybody do is making sure they're honoring their own logline, because it is the common thing that I see with my own clients that they've backed away from it. And I kind of give them certain tools to sort of check in on certain areas, make sure that they're honoring at least sort of the 2 main hooks that come through in their logline at certain stages. Another thing is being, you know, if you have these sort of behaviors that come through, these character rules, right? Turning up the dial in certain key scenes, making sure that those behaviors are constantly paying off for entertainment value, or even breaking one of the rules to show change later on. So instead of going back in and sort of redoing all of your characters, just turning up the dial on who they are. So those are some tricks I would do for story and for character. Dialogue, you could do one of the things that we talked about. For your ending, this is where a lot of people have problems with the first draft, is they thought they could cheat the ending. Okay, so yes, somebody may have found the treasure, but how did they do that? Make sure that there's a trigger moment. Like, what was the event that triggered the solution to help you find the treasure? Go back in. If that scene is missing, that needs to be there. That's really important for your rewrite.
Now, we've been talking a lot about craft and this, but I want to talk a little bit about business, about the business of screenwriting, because it's something that people don't talk about. And it's all wonderful when you have this perfect Oscar-winning screenplay in your hand, but if you don't understand how to pitch it, how to get it into the system, how the system works, that's so... I see so many... I mean, I've read screenplays that I'm just like, how is this not produced? Like, how is this not made it? And it also... And I've read screenplays from... $1 million screenwriters. And they just like, here, this is one of the 30 that I have in my drawer that I've never been able to get to produce. And I'm like, oh my God, how is this not being produced? He's like, I just can't. So it's tough for even established screenwriters, let alone for screenwriters coming in. So what advice do you have on the business side of it? And I know that's a very large question. So, whatever areas you would like to discuss.
Well, it's funny because that's not my area of expertise. Mine is all sort of in the writing and development stages. But the first answer I'm going to give is going to be an eye roll answer, because it is also about having a lot of content and really good content. And the reason I say this is because on my podcast, we've got over 600 episodes. I try and have successful screenwriters and TV writers, and we're always going back to what was that moment that triggered your big break. And it's completely random. It's all random. Like, there's never one answer. It could be, I was at this party and I'm a friend of a friend, and like we ended up bonding over skateboards, and then we found out that, it could just be random, right? Or it could be that, they tracked this one producer and they were able to really get in the room and sell them on something. But when it all came down to it, it was when they had the opportunity, it was the content. So I would be remiss if I didn't say it's all about the content first. But as far as what's going on in the industry right now, there's so many things that are happening because this agent WGA thing is actually creating new opportunities. People always get creative when certain things are cut off. That's why, like with the writer's strike, right, we started seeing other platforms develop, or independent producers rise back up and things like that. So I would say right now, get on Twitter, look at what's happening in the writers community. There are opportunities there that weren't there before. Another is, and don't be mad, but I do think that competitions have become the new vetting ground for managers and agents. If you place or win a prestigious contest, they'll go, oh, I want to look at that material. But you as the writer have to vet some of these contests and make sure that you're not just throwing your competition money at willy-nilly at things that are unproven or don't have industry connections at the end of it. So that's some advice. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that is helpful. But and also, speaking to so many screenwriters, I'm sure as you have as well in your life, you realize that a professional screenwriter is one that's not 6 years on one screenplay. That is the biggest problem I see with so many young screenwriters. I'm like, hey, how's that screenwriter? What have you done? I'm like, oh, I'm still on that screenplay. I almost got it. Almost cracked it. And it's 5 years later and they're still on that one screenplay, where the professional screenwriter in that time has gotten 10, 15, 20 screenplays done, and they're in their drawer. So when you do have that opportunity, like you were saying, that one script is not going to be it. They're going to go, they might take that one, or they might go, that's nice, it's a great example, but do you have anything else? And you should have 3 or 4 other samples or other projects waiting to go in a lot of ways. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And think of it this way. If you sell your script to a large studio, you don't own it anymore. No. So why would you be married to that? Fall in love with your scripts, but don't marry them, okay? Because somebody else is going to actually pay the money to marry that thing. You're going to have to give that bride away, Another thing is, if you rewrite, how open are you going to be to notes? You're going to be exhausted by the time somebody actually takes it and gives you notes, and then it becomes your job to do the notes. Protective
of it too.
Yes. So my advice is, sorry,
No, there's a bird behind you. There's a bird behind you in the window. Don't worry.
that was
Yeah, I see it in the background. It's all good.
oh, so cute. He's knocking. Um, is rewrite till it meets your own intentions. Okay, if you've rewritten and go, you know what, this is what I kind of had in my mind when I started, when it was just in my brain, and there it is on the page, you're done. Okay, time to send it out. If somebody wants to pay you to rewrite it, awesome. You don't need to go around chasing notes. You've met your intention.
That's awesome.
Something else.
And do you have some big do's and don'ts when writing a screenplay?
Don't chase the market.
Oh God, yes. I'm gonna start doing superhero movies because it's hot. Like,
and by the time you're done, it's not, right?
Oh God.
So yeah, so don't chase the market. Do these days try and think why you're the best writer to tell this story. Actually, no, go the other way. Find a story where really you're the best writer for it. So this matches a little bit with your personal brand. You've probably heard other guests talk about this. The idea that draw from something that's happened to you or some expertise you have. Don't turn up your nose at maybe even the job that you do. Like for example, I had a client who was coming up with this courtroom thriller, and I was like, "Have you been in the courtroom? No. Are you a woman? No. Have you experienced sexism? No." It was like all about like sexism in the courtroom and all. And I was like, not that you're not allowed to write that, but the project didn't feel authentic.
Right.
And we got to the fact that at one point he was a logger in the 70s.
Oh.
He was he was in his 20s. He was a hippie who had to go into logging to support his family. And into that logging company came these ex-cons that were hired from the local jail.
Well, hello.
I was like, yeah, exactly. So he wrote an original pilot around that. It was awesome. And guess what? He's really the person to write that.
He's the only person to write that.
Yeah. Now, did it have to match verbatim his own experience? No, it was inspired by his own experiences. So you don't have to find something that is like where you have to protect the rights of all the people around you. It's more the idea that you have some authority in this world. It feels authentic and it pitches really well. That way you're connected to it.
It's kind of like if Tarantino would do a Pixar movie, which I would go see. But that's truly not on brand, is it?
Well, but if he did a Pixar movie,
could you imagine?
He's king of certain genres, right? So in a way, if you were going to animate a certain genre, he'd be the person to do it. Plus, what if he did something about a mouse who worked in a video store and became an iconic filmmaking
film director?
Well,
it's a bit on the nose.
Way to tell.
Bit on the nose, but yes. Yes.
He'll do it, man. So,
yeah, he'll do it. And can you actually, for everyone who's listening, because we have a lot of first-time screenwriters who listen to this, can you just describe what on the nose is? Because that's a note that a lot of people get, and they just don't get what that means. Can you just really quickly explain that?
Well, I think that the way that you just sort of critiqued what I said with on the nose is I was being awfully literal, right?
Yes.
It was like, well, that is definitely his story, literally. It's not taking maybe an experience and nuancing it, right? So that's one version of on the nose. But when we're talking about dialogue being on the nose, it's often when someone's speaking their thoughts or feelings out loud. So they're saying things like, "Oh, I'm
so angry right now."
Right. I'm experiencing this mixture of entertainment and embarrassment right now and talking to you, Alex, right? Like that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is an epidemic as well. A lot of times with first time writers as well. I did it when I started writing. I was writing right on the nose, and that was the note I would get back from studios when they would see my scripts, and they would say, "It's on the nose, it's on the nose," and I'm like, "What the hell is?" I had to look what on the nose meant, and I was like, "Oh, It's called about nuances, subtext, a look, always show, don't tell whenever you can.
And it goes back to what you said about the audience has educated themselves in movies and TV. They're a really smart, savvy audience. So they get the context. All they have to see is that visual clue, and they get it. A whole story is told.
And now you have a new book coming that just came out a little while ago, right?
Yeah, it's a little thin. There you go. But I guess we could call it a book. It's called Coffee Break Screenwriter Breaks the Rules. Okay. And it's all about, those rules you all think you're supposed to follow because of all those other books and stuff. It sort of goes like, well, you know what? You should break those rules. But if you break those rules, here's why the rule's there to begin with. Here's how to break it creatively to actually make your script a little more original, right? But here's also how breaking that rule can break bad if you go too far with it. So it's looking at all those things that should be educational and fun, and it gives you permission to do something a little nuts.
And when you said break bad, Walter White just flew into my head. It was such a good show.
Everything revolves around Walter White.
Obviously. Yeah. What's my name? Anyway. So I'm going to ask you a few questions I ask all of my guests. What advice would you give a screenwriter wanting to break into the business today?
What advice would I give? Again, start with your own experiences. Look around you right now. Where are you? What can you mine from who you are and what you know?
Okay. And now can you tell me a book that had the biggest impact on your life or career?
Wow. God, I wasn't prepared for these.
That's why I do that.
As far as Linda Aronson's book, God, what was it? Screenwriting Reconstructed, or oh my God.
Okay, got it. We'll look it up.
About nonlinear screenwriting, her first screenwriting book, Linda Aronson. And I really respected the fact that she was trying to find patterns outside of conventional structure. Screenwriting Updated. Sorry, okay. I'm getting, as we've established. So Linda Aronson's Screenwriting Updated, I really, really admired the effort to really dig in and find out why unconventional storytelling works.
Got it. Now, what lesson took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
God, I guess I'm still learning it. You know what lesson took me the longest to learn? Is that I'm always learning. Is that you are always learning on the job, that you never know everything. Every day there is something new to learn, and so be open to it. So that's what I'm learning, is that I'm still learning.
Now, what was the biggest fear you had to overcome to achieve one of the biggest goals of your life?
Oh, gosh. People think, because I have a podcast, and
I feel you.
And I teach publicly, they think I must be a very sort of public, showy person. I really don't like social media. I don't Google myself. Every day is kind of some wrestling with the anxiety of how open everything is right now.
It is pretty open.
There are advantages to it. There are disadvantages as well. And every day, I think you have to be a little bit brave if you want to communicate to a lot of people. So that's my daily fear is I don't know.
It's social media, basically. It's just
I have a little bit of anxiety about it. I hate being on camera. I hate being on video. I hate it. But you know what?
You've done fantastic. You've done fantastic. And I hope I've made it easy for you, but it's been fantastic having you on camera. I think this is something that happens to podcasters because, I've been podcasting for almost 4 years now on my 2 podcasts. And when I do it basically alone in a room with a mic, or I'm doing it like this over a Skype call with somebody. And, it's very different than being out like a YouTuber.
Right.
Like getting out there and like, okay, guys, we're going to go do this. Like, I'm not that dude either. A lot of people think that I'm very, and I am to a certain extent, but I'm happy at home. I don't need to be out at a club somewhere.
Right. Exactly.
Those days are gone for me. I'm very happy about that.
The introverted extrovert, right? I think
you're the introverted extrovert.
Those categories.
It's the extrovert who enjoys being an introvert.
Right. Can't wait to go back to their introverted life.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. I'm going to just veg at home with my wife and watch Netflix tonight. I don't need to go out party anywhere. And now the toughest question of all. Mm-hmm. 3 of your favorite films of all time.
Oh, Paper Moon. I love Paper Moon.
Yeah, good movie.
It's one that I can watch over and over again. And you're gonna laugh at me on
it's
this
okay.
one.
I've heard it all on the show.
It's such a scriptwriting teacher thing to say, but Citizen Kane
is it's been on the
fantastic movie. I really, really love. It's different points of view. I was one of those people that was like, "What? That was Rosebud?" Like that was.
Spoiler alert! Hello. No, I'm joking. I thought you were gonna say Chinatown.
Nah, no, yeah. I'm really I'm not in love with Chinatown. Don't tell anybody, Okay. But and then gosh, I always go with sort of like my latest boyfriend, and my latest boyfriend, I keep going back to. He's book smart. Yeah, I was so happy about that movie for so many reasons. Mm-hmm. So so I would say those 3 movies off the top of my head.
Cool. Now, where can people find you and your work?
On thepage.tv. That is my website for classes. I love it when people show up in classes. Mm-hmm. And now I'm also doing online video classes. Again, trying not to be afraid of the camera so that I can actually teach in real time to people all over. So check that out, and the book's there, and links to the podcast and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Pilar, it has been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad we finally got to do this. It was great talking to you. Thank you so much for dropping some major knowledge bombs today on The Tribe. I appreciate it.